Hey everyone, how's everybody doing on this fantastic Tuesday in the Philippines, Monday night in the US, I think. So today we're going to talk about what happened on Alaska Airlines Flight 261 in the year 2017, the month, September, the date, September 16th. Okay, let's examine what happened because this is crazy. Alaska Airlines has had many crashes. Is that because they're using shit planes? They're undermining their budget or what? What is it? That's what I want to know. Give me your opinions. Please post your opinions below. Okay? This is from, let me post the link in the comment section. I'm going to post the link. Just look for the link. My information comes from here. Okay? What happened to Alaska Airlines 261, September 16, 2017. It's not that long ago, people. I'm doing a series on Alaska Airlines. Let's see why. What's going on? Leave your comments, please. On the 31st of January 2000, an Alaska Airlines MD 83. What? Wait a minute. Oh, okay. Hold on. This crash was in the year 2000. Sorry. This airline crash was in the year 2000. All right, hold on. Okay. What month? Okay, the 31st of January. Sorry, my bad. January. January 31st. The year 2000. Okay, here you go. I was reading something else. Sorry. Okay, here we go. On the 31st of January 2000, an Alaska Airlines MD 83 bound for San Francisco suddenly plunged from the sky off the coast of California, spiraling downward until it until it slammed into the Pacific Ocean. The horrific crash killed all 88 people on board and raised troubling questions about one of America's largest airlines. So, Alaska Airlines is one of the largest airlines. I see them advertised everywhere. I'm flying back to the US soon and I will have to take an Alaska Airlines. It's okay. For 2 hours, the crew of the ill-fated jet had struggled with a malfunctioning stabilizer. That's at the rear of the plane, just to let you know. It's in the tail of the plane. Unaware that this critical flight control system had turned into a ticking time bomb, counting down toward a catastrophic failure. Indeed, the final, terrifying dive was the culmination not just of hours of failed troubleshooting, but of years upon years of negligent maintenance. So, Alaska Airlines was neglecting their maintenance hours because they wanted to save money. That's the story I read, to cut back on their expenses. I'm going to read it again. The crew of the ill-fated jet had struggled with a malfunctioning stabilizer, unaware that this critical flight control system had turned into a ticking time bomb, counting down toward catastrophic failure. Indeed, the final, terrifying dive was the culmination not just of hours of failed troubleshooting, but of years upon years of ignored maintenance, blatant corruption, and lax federal oversight. Lax federal oversight. The um, the federal government who oversees the federal aid, uh, the FDA, no, the Federal Flight Administration. What's it called? Hold on. The FAA. Sorry. The FAA safely manages more than 50,000 U.S. commercial and general aviation flights daily. The FAA issues and enforces, I repeat that, enforces regulations covering manufacturing, operating, and maintaining aircraft. The FAA also certifies airmen and airports that serve air carriers. I'm going to read that again. The federal, the FAA safely manages more than 50,000 U.S. commercial and general aviation flights daily. The FAA issues and enforces regulations covering manufacturing, covering operating, and covering maintaining the aircraft. The FAA also certifies airmen and airports that serve air carriers. Okay? That's their job, to oversee the aircraft that are flying so people are safe in the air. So 50, it doesn't matter, 50, 80, 100, 100 plus, 200 plus, don't get killed on a daily basis or at all. All right? Negligent maintenance, blatant corruption, and lax federal oversight. Lax federal oversight. What does that mean? What does lax federal oversight mean when it comes to airlines. People, you shouldn't be scared to fly. You should be positive and looking forward to fly. But when these crashes happen, they're out of the ordinary. There's nothing good about it. Okay? Here we go. I'm going to send you this link. This is from Vox.com. I'm going to read it. Hold on. I'm going to post this in the comment section, okay? You ready? This is from Vox.com. I just posted it so you know where I'm getting my information. What the FAA, the FAA gets right about airplane regulation. Regulators need to take in the whole picture of risk as they do with air travel rather than just a narrow slice. The sight of a hole in the side of a Boeing 737 MAX airplane earlier this month, among other questions. An old debate: is it really a good idea to hold your baby in your arms when you fly? Well, wow. The side of a hole in the side of a Boeing 737, made by Boeing in the US, made by experts who build these planes. Why are they allowed to build them with shit parts? Max airplane earlier this month, resurrected. Among other questions, an older debate: is it really a good idea to hold your baby in your arms when you fly? Hmm, I don't really know. The Federal Aviation Administration, the FAA, the Federal Aviation Administration, the FAA, strongly recommends that you get a separate secured seat for even a very young child. Oh, a baby? Are you kidding me? Why don't you build your planes better so they're not crashing and parts aren't being torn off in midair? The Federal Aviation Administration, FAA, strongly recommends that you get a separate secured seat for even a very young child below the age of 2. Oh my gosh. But they haven't banned the practice of carrying your child on your lap in your own seat. You know why? Where else are you going to put your baby? They don't have a child carrying room where people are going to take care of your baby, right? They don't have people um, helping you. What's that? What about the 6 month old that can't even walk yet? The 3 year old that was just born? The Federal Aviation Administration, the FAA, comes under justified fire for being too lenient about increasing signs of lax practices and problems at Boeing. I've seen this policy criticized. A kid being held would have been torn from the hands of their parents if there's decompression, and they would have been sucked out of the plane. If there's decompression, a hole in the plane during the flight, your baby, if you're holding that baby, will get sucked right out into the atmosphere and thrown down to the fucking ground. Aviation safety expert Kawazi Adjikum told the Washington Post, referring to what happened to Alaska Airlines Flight 1282 on January 5th. The National Transportation Safety Board has repeatedly recommended that the FAA ban lap children. So what do? as the FAA comes under fire for being too lenient about increasing signs of lax practices and problems at Boeing. I've seen this policy criticized. A kid being held would have been torn from the hands of their parents, and they would have been sucked out of the plane. Aviation safety experts Kawasi Ajakum told the Washington Post, referring to what happened to Alaska Airlines Flight 1282. Yes, this subject is about Alaska Airlines Flight 261 with a faulty piece of equipment. I know that. Just try to follow me. The National Transportation Safety Board has repeatedly recommended that the FAA ban lap children. But I actually want to go to bat for the FAA here. Oh, really? I think their policy of advising against lap children, but not banning them, gets exactly right. A really important, frequently neglected aspect of regulation, and it's one other regulatory agencies could learn from. Regulation and our notion of responsibility. Say, I'm a regular responsible. Say, I'm a regulator responsible for an environmentally impact review of a new apartment building in a major city. It's my job to consider the impact of the apartment building on local sewage and water supplies and drainage, carbon emissions, local wildlife, sunlight and shade effects, and lots more. In California, an environmental impact analysis must consider 18 different factors. But here's one factor that doesn't get considered. If the apartment doesn't get built because of one or more of those 18 environmental factors, where will the people who would have lived there live instead? Where will they live? Often, the answer is in distant suburbs, and building there instead of a denser city will put far greater stress on the water supply and emit that vastly more carbon dioxide. Okay, regulators need to see the whole picture. I want to emphasize again that it's deeply unusual for the FAA to take this into account at all. Most regulatory agencies don't consider such concerns in scope. Their job is to prevent incidents in their department, nothing more. Wow. But of course, good regulatory policy absolutely requires taking this sort of broad perspective. Whenever we approve or fail to approve a power plant, that affects whether other plants get built or keep running. When we engage in exclusionary zoning or short sighted development policy, the costs aren't just paid in a few city blocks, but across the whole country and potentially the whole world. So, regulations are written in blood, and nowhere is the more true than the aviation industry, where nearly every element of the flying experience today, from the lights that guide you to exit rows to safety briefing to redundant mechanical systems that keep the plane in the air, was crafted only in aftermath of tragedy. Of tragedy. I'm going to read it again. Regulations are written in blood, and nowhere is that more evident and true than the aviation industry, the flying industry, where nearly every element of the flying experience today, from the lights that guide you, to the exit rows, to the safety briefing, to the redundant mechanical systems that keep the plane in the air, was crafted only in the aftermath of tragedy, of death. That means. But it's also easy when regulations are written in blood to just keep writing them and forget that our regulations have trade offs, that harm reduction is also a public policy priority, and that sometimes the best thing to do is not to mandate, but to advise. Don't mandate, don't make it a law, but to advise. Advise what? What's wrong with these politicians? That's what that means. Are you going to advise or set it in writing that it's a law that if the plane has a bad part, you have to ground the plane. If the inspections have to be better, the inspections have to be good for the people who are flying. That's what that means. If you can afford it, getting a separate seat for your child and the FAA approved child restraint systems. No, wait, let me pause. You can't get a separate seat for a 3-year old. I mean, a 3-month old. Carry your baby and hold that baby and protect that baby until the end of the flight. That's what this is crap. If you can afford it, getting a separate seat for your child and an FAA approved child restraint system. Okay? Well, if the baby's 3 months old or 6 months old, supply a seat so we can bring our babies on board and they're safe. It's the safest way to fly. It's the safest way to fly. But I think the fact it's not the only legal way to fly. But I think the fact it's not the only legal way to fly is a symptom of healthy attitude about safety. That is that it has to be pursued relentlessly, aggressively, but with an eye for the big picture and a reminder that cheap, reliable commercial aviation is itself something that saves lives. So give us seats for our babies like a car seat, restraints. If there's a decompression issue in the plane, the baby's getting sucked out of the window. The baby can be sucked out of a door plug. You know what? Start doing your job, FAA. Stop looking for excuses. Now let's talk about Flight 261. Okay? Flight 261. Okay, Flight 261 in the year 2000, January 31st, the year 2000, this flight slammed into the Pacific Ocean, killing. It was bound for San Francisco. San Francisco, California. How beautiful would it have been for those passengers? Among major U.S. airlines, Alaska has charted perhaps the most unusual course across its long and fascinating history. Alaska Airlines began its life as a regional airline in Alaska, and by the time Deregulation arrived in the late 1970s. It only had one destination in the lower 48 states of the United States. But over the next 2 decades, Alaska Airlines pursued an aggressive strategy of expanding their business. Hello, CEO. Where's your safety? Who's the CEO? I would love to do an interview with you now. I challenge CEO of Alaska Airlines, come onto my podcast on my Facebook channel and interview me. I will interview you. But over the next two over the next 2 decades, which is 20 years, a decade is 10 years, Alaska Airlines pursued an aggressive strategy to expand the business, aiming to become an affordable option for travelers throughout the western United States. Let's expand, of course, let's make more money. It added dozens of new traveling routes, expanded expanded to a large number of new cities, and even added services to Mexico, in order to offset the seasonal nature of its flights to Alaska. Never been to Alaska, but I would love to go. Maybe I'll take a flight on Alaska Airlines. Indeed, by the end of the 1990s, what had once been a small regional carrier has successfully transformed itself into one of America's largest airlines. Oh, that's beautiful, with many crashes. But this very success may have planted the seeds of the disaster which followed. Oh, but this very success may have planted the seeds of the very disaster which followed. During the 1990s, low cost competitors such as Mark Air, which I never heard of, I think they're out of business, in Alaska, and Southern Airlines in the Pacific Northwest began trying to undercut Alaska's more traditional fare model on numerous core routes. In 1991, after posting a record loss of 121 million, the company's business analysts concluded that to remain competitive and remain busy, Alaska Airlines needed to reduce expenses. Oh, here we go. Reduce the expenses at the at the at the customer's health loss, at life and loss, after posting a record of 121 million, a loss. The company's business analysts concluded that to remain competitive and remain open and competitive, Alaska Airlines needed to reduce expenses and so began a slash and burn costs, cutting campaign that culminated in a terrible black mark which will forever hang over the company. A tragedy so horrible and so preventable as should have been. Yeah, it's all about money. I'm going to read it again. A campaign that culminated in a terrible black mark which will forever hang over the company. A tragedy so horrible and so preventable that it would call the safety of the entire industry into question. Why would the FAA allow this? Where are you, FAA? Where are you, Federal Aviation Administration, when it comes to rules, when it comes to safety and people's lives? I want to call you out. Where are you? Give me an interview. But this very success of Alaska Airlines may have planted the seeds of a disaster which followed during the 1990s. Low cost competitors that came about, such as Mark Air in Alaska and Southwest Airlines in the Pacific, Northwest began trying to undercut Alaska's more traditional fare model on numerous core routes. On numerous routes in 1991, after posting a record loss, Alaska Airlines loss of 121 million. The company business analyst concluded that to remain open and competitive, Alaska Airlines needed to reduce expenses and so began a slash and burn cost cutting campaign. They started a reduced cost and cutting campaign, a campaign that culminated in a terrible black mark which will forever hang over the company. A tragedy so horrible and it was so preventable with the right maintenance that it would call the safety of the entire industry into question. Where are you, FAA? 9 years after the cost cutting began, 9 years after the cost cutting began, Alaska Airlines was posting profits again. Its fleet was expanding and passenger numbers were higher than ever. Why? The tickets were cheaper, of course. The turn of the millennium had just come and gone, and the future again seemed limitless. And so it was that on a sunny day in January the year 2000, in January the year 2000, in January the fucking year 2000, 83 passengers and 5 crew boarded Alaska Airlines flight. I want you to remember this number. Do your own research, do your own due diligence. This is all the big cover up all over the internet. On a sunny day in January, the year 2000, the month of my birthday, which is coming up January 9th, 83 passengers and 5 crew members boarded Alaska Airlines flight number people 261 in the resort city of Puerto Vallarta, Puerto Vallarta, Mexico, bound for San Francisco, California. The 8-year-old McDonnell Douglas MD-83. Remember that Douglas, the 8-year-old McDonnell Douglas MD-83 registered as N is in Nancy, the number 9, the number 6, the number 3, A is in Apple, and S is in Sam. N963AS outwardly seemed to be in good shape. Yeah, look at the jet. It's pretty, right? The audience is great. How's the mechanicals working? The pilots, 53-year-old Captain Ted Thompson and 57-year-old First Officer Bill Tansky, could not have known that they were about to play out the final chapter. The pilots, 53-year-old Captain Ted Thompson and 57-year-old First Officer Bill Tansky, could not have known in a million years that they were about to play out the final chapter in a sordid story that had been building toward its conclusion for years. Indeed, all seemed normal as flight number 269 climbed out of Puerto Vallarta, heading for its crushing altitude of 31,000 feet. How many flights have I been on at 31,000 feet? I have been on many. Ah, I have been on many flights at 31,000 feet. Was I a little nervous? Yeah, not too much. Indeed, all seemed normal as Flight 261 climbed out of Puerto Vallarta, Heading towards cruising altitude of 31,000 feet, the Gulf of California stretched out below them, bright and blue, and then as the plane passed through 23,400 feet, a warning light flickered on and in the cockpit. A warning light flicked on in the cockpit. Autopilot trim, it said. It was the first sign that something was, in fact, gravely wrong with their plane. All large airplanes have what is referred to as a trimmable horizontal stabilizer. The stabilizer on the MD-80 series rests on the top of the tail, on the tail, and like all airliners, it can move up and down to adjust the pitch angle at which the plane is stable. Flying straight, if the pilot wants it to go up, the trim stabilizer is always the the pilot is in control of that. Different speeds and phases of the flight require the stabilizer to apply varying amounts of downforce on the tail in order to keep the plane level, and further adjustments must be made to ensure that the pilots don't have to continually pull up or push down using the elevators in order to climb or descend. Now, the elevators are those handles that you see on these flights. They shouldn't have to use force, only a little. The horizontal stabilizer does the work as the pilot only uses a little force, and further adjustments must be made to ensure that the pilots don't have to continuously pull up or push down using the elevators in order to climb or descend. By trimming the stabilizer to, for example, a nose up position, the pilots or the autopilot can keep the plane in a steady climb without touching the controls on it. The basic design of the stabilizer is relatively simple. The stabilizer is attached to a giant threaded screw. Okay, it's a big screw. I thought it was small. Called the jack screw, which feeds through a nut. So the screw's going into a nut. A screw's going into a nut. If this was a screw, it's going into a nut. A nut. The stabilizer is attached to a giant threaded screw called the jack screw, which feeds through a nut attached to the aircraft structure inside the tail. Two electric motors spin the jack screw within the nut, so it's spinning. The jack screw is going to go down or it's going to go up. There's a screw. It's going to go down or it's going to go up. Downforce on the tail decreases and the nose pitches downward. Similarly, when the stabilizer moves downward, downforce increases and the nose of the plane pitches up. Mechanical stops attached to the jack screw prevent the stabilizer from moving farther than 2.5 degrees. Mechanical stops attached to the jack screw prevent the stabilizer from moving farther than 2.5 degrees upward or 12.5 degrees downward. You don't want the plane pitching downward. You're going to crash. To avoid confusion from here on out, nose up and nose down. That's the layperson speaking. Nose up and nose down. As they relate to the pitch of the airplane, will be used to describe the stabilizer direction of the motion. Keep in mind that the pitch of the stabilizer itself is actually inverse to the pitch of the airplane. Keep in mind that the pitch of the stabilizer itself is actually inverse to the pitch of the plane. The jack screw nut is one of the few components of the MD-80 series that does not have a redundant backup in case of failure. That's what I was wondering. This plane crashed because there was no backup. Planes need backups, not not to cut, not to be kripot, not to be kripot in mechanical, not not to trim on the budget when it comes to mechanical maintenance, failure parts. As such, it is critically important that the jack screw be kept in good working order, primarily through the liberal application of grease at regular intervals. Yeah, the metal from which the jack screw is made is ever so slightly harder than the metal used in the nut. Over time, this minute difference will cause the jack screw to wear away the threads of the nut. If metal on metal contact is allowed to occur, the metal from which the jack screw is made is ever so slightly harder than the metal used in the nut. Over time, this minute difference will cause the jack screw to wear away the threads on the nut if metal on metal contact is allowed to occur. When greased regularly, the nut on the MD80 series is designed to last for 30,000 flight hours. Oh, let's pause there. Alaska Airlines to expand, cut back on maintenance, right? So they're not searching everything. They cut back on maintenance and and mechanical fixes. When greased regularly, the nut on the MD8 series is designed to last for 30,000 flight hours before requiring a replacement, long enough that most planes will see only two or three different jack screw nuts during the entire time it's service. Well, they were replacing the jack screw nuts, or they weren't replacing the fucking screws, risking death and people's lives in midair. So they crash and they fire and they fucking burn. What bullshit is that? In 1987, Alaska Airlines greased the stabilizer jack screws on its MD-80s every 500 flight hours. In 1987, Alaska Airlines greased the stabilizer jack screws on its MD-80s every 500 flight hours, the value recommended by the manufacturer of the jack screw. Grease it every 500 hours. Not when you feel like it, not when you feel like opening the tail of the plane to grease your part. No, do your job. But as the airline began cutting costs over the following decade due to maintenance costs, they wanted to expand, risking everyone's lives. One of the areas that got put on the chopping block was maintenance. I just read it. I'm not making this up. I sent you the link. Read it yourself. But as the airline began cutting costs over the following decade, one of the areas that got put on the chopping block, meaning they don't care, was maintenance. Performing maintenance less frequently saved on labor costs and kept the planes in the air longer. Oh, it kept them in the air longer, thus increasing revenue, increasing money. As a result, Alaska Airlines slowly increased the interval between jack screw lubrications from 500 flight hours in 1987 to every 8 months. Oh my gosh, approximately 2,250 flight hours in 1999. I'm going to read it again because I want you to get it. I'm not making this shit up. As a result, Alaska Airlines slowly increased the interval between jack screw lubrications from 500 flight recommended hours in 1987 to every 8 months, approximately 2,250 flight hours in 1999. In theory, this was adequate. Adequate? How do you figure? But only if the grease was applied correctly every time. Grease wears out, things get dry. Here's a picture of the jack screw. I'll send it, okay? Oh, you need that red grease. I use the red grease. I had a business for years. Copy image.
And it's on fire the airplane. The airplane is on fire for the water.
I used this red grease in a business that I had for years. And you know what? It was a lot less than even less than 500 American hours. Red grease. All right. I'm going to post this in the comment section. Watch and learn, people. Watch and learn. How do I do that?
What house?
Okay, I'll post the link later. This red grease I used in my last business, and you can't wait that long, man. I greased the shit out of my. It was called a. However, during. Oh, here we go. I'll post the link later. Look, it's a red grease. It doesn't last forever. It doesn't even last 200 hours. You got to keep greasing that. Oh my gosh. I used this. I had a carpet cleaning business for almost 24 years, and I worked on my own machine. I would take the bullet out. It was a similar pump. I forgot the name. It was called a bullet. You had to grease that. Put the red grease on and make sure it's working good. I did it all the time. Alaska Airlines thought they didn't have to grease their parts. The seemingly simple task of greasing the jack screw was not immune to this degradation of the maintenance environment. According to the official maintenance manual, greasing the jack screw bell involved three main steps. First, pressurized grease was to be injected into a special tube on the nut until it filled all the thread gaps between the nut and the jack screw. So why weren't they fucking doing it, bro? And started to bulge out of the top. Then additional grease was to be applied to the entire length of the screw. Dude, save lives. Then if I'm missing something here, fucking tell me, but I'm not. Then additional grease was to be applied to the entire length of the screw. Grease the motherfucker, filling all the threads. Finally, the stabilizer was to be moved repeatedly between full nose up and full nose down so that the nut could spread the grease evenly over the entire jack screw. How many lazy maintenance technical people were on that? Every time I've flown, they're just opening the cover to the motor using a fucking flashlight, and they let the plane fucking go. Watch the seemingly simple task of greasing this jack screw. And I've used this red grease. I bought this red grease. I had a carpet cleaning business called East Carpet Cleaning. I had a truck mounted machine. And this pump was had a spring and a bullet. And if you don't grease that, it's not working properly. I always took it out. I always greased it, and I made sure it wasn't. So as an example, stainless steel. If you don't have grease and you have a part moving back and forth fast on a screw, it's going to get warped. It's called warped, scratched, and it's not going to move properly. Then you're going to have a problem. The difference is my carpet cleaning business. was on the fucking ground. I'm not flying a plane in the air. I've never learned so much in my life, but I saw this red grease. I bought this red grease, and I'm going to show you a picture later. Look on my Facebook page. Watch. If done correctly, the process took about 4 hours. However, Alaska Airlines maintenance personnel often did it in as little as 1 hour. Oh, really? I wouldn't have guessed. Those lazy bastards, bro. What if you're flying on that plane? You want it done in less than an hour? That's grease. I put my flashlight there. We're all set. The seemingly simple task of greasing this jack screw was not immune to degradation of the maintenance environment. If done correctly, the process took 4 hours. Why not? You're flying people in the air, Alaska Airlines. Let me talk to your CEO. I would love to interview you, bro, about your flight maintenance procedures and what you have to adhere by. Even now in 2025, it's coming up 2025. I want to talk to you if done correctly. The process took 4 fucking hours. However, Alaska Airlines maintenance personnel often did it in as little as 1 hour. Dude, dude, I can barely go to a restaurant and order a meal that I love and get it done in 1 hour and drink a beer. Alaska Airlines maintenance personnel, but because they didn't understand the proper, they understood because, oh my gosh, but because they didn't understand the proper procedure and skipped some of the steps. The only reason you're skipping, I'm going to read it again. But because maintenance personnel didn't understand the proper procedure and skipped some of the steps, many workers who greased jock screws didn't apply additional grease to the screw itself after greasing the nut. Bro, I can grease my fucking nuts faster than they can grease these jock screws. Seriously. Like, this is shit, bro. Oh my gosh. This is a plane, it's a jet, if done correctly. The process took 4 hours. However, Alaska airline maintenance personnel often did it in as little as 1 hour, not because they found a more efficient way, but because they were lazy. I just changed it. Not because they didn't understand the proper procedure and skipped some of the steps. Dude, come on, bro. Many workers who grease jack screws didn't apply the initial grease enough to the screw to run feet, failing even to ensure that the grease totally filled the inside of the nut. Oh my gosh, wait till I show you a picture of how much grease should be applied there and how the nut moves inside and out. Failing even to ensure the grease totally filled the inside of the nut. A nut goes on the end of a screw, right? It's supposed to, so this nut, the screw is moving inside and outside of the nut, but the nut doesn't fall off. And because of the increased interval before poorly greased jack screws, and because the increased intervals, the time, because they cut back on maintenance and they cut back on their budget, a jack screw with insufficient, not enough grease couldn't expect to see more until the plane had been in the air for 2,250 hours. Bro, Alaska Air, you are guilty. You know why? I'll tell you in a minute. The problem was that with insufficient red grease, the threads on the nut began to wear down at a faster rate with no grease at all, making the horizontal level of the plane not work. The rate of the wear would increase by a factor of 10 or more, scorching the nut, scorching the metal on the screw, on the jack screw. In order to catch abnormal wear before it escalated to the point of failure, ND-80 operators regularly inspected their stabilizer jack screw nuts to ensure that the wear remained within limits. No, they didn't. No, they didn't. In order to catch the abnormal wear, because they cut back on the budget of their planes to expand and make more money, risking people's lives, and they killed them. Operators often inspected their stabilizer jack screw nuts to ensure that the wear remained within limits. Alaska Air specifically did this every 30 months. 30 months, bro? Alaska specifically did this every 30 months. What are they doing now in 2024? That's what I want to know. What are you doing, Alaska Air? Show me an interview. You know why? I want to talk to the CEO. Or every 30 months, there's no more grease. Grease goes away, it gets heated, it evaporates. Or 9,550 flight hours by torquing the screw up and down without turning it and measuring the amount of play in the system. It was possible to roughly determine the depth of the wear on the nut threads, which the manufacturer's guidelines stated must be less than 1 millimeter. They're not doing all of that, bro. These guys throw their flashlights in an engine and they let the plane go. How many times have I seen that? But the measurements were imprecise. Of course, they were imprecise. They weren't correct. And repeated tests often produce different results, allowing a certain repeated tests often. They repeated tests often produced different results because they wanted to hear what they were. They wanted to get out easy, allowing a certain amount of ambiguity as to whether the value was over or under the limit. N963AS. N is in Nancy, 963, as A is in Apple, S is in Sam. The plane that would later become Alaska Airlines Flight 261 crashed because you guys weren't greasing this shit, was one of many in the airline's fleet that was subject to these marginal maintenance calls because you cut back on your fucking budget and you killed 83 fucking people. No, you killed 83 people in the year 2000 because you're not doing your fucking job, bro. Fuck you, Alaska Air. Let me interview your CEO now and see what you're doing to correct your fucking problems. Peace out.